Good morning, everyone. My name is Alex Coe, and I'm an MBA student at MIT Sloan. It's my pleasure to introduce today's conversation, Have the Nerds Ruined Basketball? A conversation on competitiveness, three-pointers, and rule changes. Today, our panelists are Daryl Morey, President of Basketball Operations at the Philadelphia 76ers, Sue Bird, WNBA champion, Olympic gold medalist, and co-founder of A Touch More and Together.
List after Sue, yeah.
Indeed. Mike Zarin, VP of Basketball Operations and Team Counsel at the Boston Celtics. Evan Wash, Executive VP of Basketball Strategy and Analytics at the NBA. And our moderator is Deepak Malhotra, Professor at Harvard Business School. This panel will run for about 45 minutes, and we'll aim to address some audience Q&A in the latter portion, so please get those in via the Cadence app. And with that, it should be a fun one. It's all yours.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you all for being here. I am delighted to be on stage with this wonderful set of guests. Although I will warn you, there's been this promise that we're going to get to audience questions. We were on a prep Zoom call a little while ago, and I decided that this session could have been called Have the Nerds Ruined Basketball or just a bunch of people arguing. So we're going to see how far we get with this set of questions that we have prepared. But the ideal here is we're going to start with the conversation around the three-point shot and the three-point revolution that took place in the NBA. And then we're going to try to zoom out and address the question a little bit more broadly, looking at the role of analytics in basketball and in sports, and whether it's been all positive, whether there's some negativity in there, and what it's done to the game itself. I want to start out by just laying the foundation for this, this foundational question on the three-point revolution. And what I would like to do is put up an image about on screen that shows you the most common shot locations about 2 decades ago. This is the top 100 shot locations in 2001, 2002. And if we can bring the second image up, you'll get to see what happened about 15 years later. And this, I think, encapsulates the fundamental question that faces us, which is, has this been good or bad? Now, why did this happen? It happened not because people said you should shoot more three-pointers. It happened because people said stop shooting inefficient two-pointers. If you're going to be so far from the hoop, might as well be a little bit farther and get 50% more points. And this math was true for a very long time before the transition took place. But eventually, people like Daryl and others sort of brought this out into the NBA. And the question is this a problem? And I'm going to ask the panelists to address this question. Is this a problem for the game? Is this a problem for how interesting the game is? Because there's people out there that are saying it makes it less interesting, there's no creativity, there's no imagination, the game has become a three-point shooting competition. So Daryl, we'll start with you. Do you think this is a problem?
I do, yeah. I think game design's important. I don't think it's the fault of the teams or the analysts out there, because their job is just to win. But to me, the bottom line is it was added many years ago, and it's 50% more than the other shots. That's simply too much. It essentially breaks the game, and I think if you have the best players in the league taking wide open 8 to 15 foot shots is worse than a heavily contested off the dribble three. That is bad for the game, and I think it's the responsibility of the league office to take a look at this, because the teams are just going to optimize. And where I've seen the other sports do a very good job, and the NBA has done a very good job historically, is to change their game so that as teams optimize, it makes the game more interesting. And I believe that because it's 50% more, the game is becoming less interesting as teams optimize.
Well, because Evan was specifically called out in your response, I'm going to let Evan go next on what you think about this. Do you agree?
I do not.
Do you not agree that it's a problem, or do you not agree it's your job to fix it?
So I don't believe that the league exists to serve as an optimization laboratory for Daryl. And in fact, not to ruin our panel, it doesn't actually matter what any of us think. We're here to present a game to our fans that they want to see. So the only question that matters from our perspective is the style of play that results from the game design something that our fans actually want to see, or is it something that actually requires a little bit more diversity, variability than just what we're seeing? Now, we don't like to focus solely on the three-point shots because there's a whole set of things that happen in an NBA game besides the shots. Roughly 15% of an NBA game is shooting. The rest is all sorts of different offensive and defensive actions that our fans may or may not like. And embedded in that shot chart, it might be hard to glean there, but we have the same percentage of shots we've always had in the paint, the same percentage within 5 feet, within 10 feet, within 15 feet. All that's happened is those 15-foot and beyond long twos have become threes. And so we do a lot of research to understand whether that is a positive or negative trend for our fans. And actually, generally, it's quite positive. Fans have loved the three-point revolution. They love pace and space. They love the speed and physicality of the players. They love shots around the basket. So there's a lot of positive trends in there. There's an open question whether we're now going too far and need to scale back a little bit to bring back some of the fans that may have been disillusioned by what they're seeing. But I certainly don't believe that there's this fundamental problem with the game design, because all that matters is what product we put out there for the fans.
What point total for a three would you be arguing it is a problem?
It's,
If it was worth 10, would you be making the same argument right now?
I would be curious how teams would play in that world.
Okay, so you're just completely now. If it was 100 points, you'd be like, this is fine. The fans like it.
The rule
This is fine.
A game design or a rule in and of itself cannot be a problem. It is only a problem if the style of play that results from that is not exciting.
And we're
to
already there at 3, so
That
congratulations.
is your belief.
You made
So
my-
let's get a couple more. Why don't we get a player's perspective on how the game is played and whether it's actually interesting for people when things change in this way, and then we'll get Mike in here as well. I think has his own point of view on this. Yeah.
I feel like I'm sitting between my divorced parents. Because I'm a mid-range shooter,
Exactly.
but I
This is
shoot
for you.
threes. I'm a mid-range shooter at heart, but I want to win. So I'm like, which parent am I choosing? It's difficult. I will say this. I don't think the game is broken. I still find it very entertaining. I think people find it entertaining. I think the narrative of it is making it exists, but I think the narrative's making it worse. But I will say, I did go to randomly saw a college pickup game the other day, and I noticed something where a college kid, so at best mediocre, caught it at the top of the key. College kid, like student, not athlete. Okay, caught it at the top of the key, pump faked. And instead of taking the one dribble in for the pull-up, sidestepped for a three.
Sounds familiar.
Clang, terrible shot, obviously. And I thought to myself, ugh, Daryl.
But here's the thing, Evan says that's not a terrible shot. That is the optimal thing to do.
I know, but for bad players it is, and that's kind of my
Did
point.
the fans cheer?
Yeah, me, the one fan.
Yeah.
No, I went, Daryl,
Out loud?
in my head.
Can I ask you if one of your coaches of your career said what NBA coaches are telling players now, which is, we know you're very good at that 18-foot shot, Sue, but can you just go 8 feet farther back, please?
8 feet?
Yeah, please. That's better. I know you don't make it as much, but we offensive rebound it more. Even if you miss, it's fine.
What would I think, or what would I think?
No, what would you think about your coach? How would you feel?
I feel like they would probably be telling me the analytics show that we're going to win more games this way.
100%.
So yeah, at some point the team would evolve that way.
You wouldn't believe
I
what
don't
Kevin
like.
Garnett said to us when we tried to tell him that.
So
I
To
can't
finish
say
it up,
that.
I don't like the
The
only
next
part I
Kevin
don't like-
Garnett's going to be shooting from not 18 feet like
It's
he did,
great.
but from 20.
We'll win more.
The only part I don't like, I'll throw this in there, is I do think it takes away, if a coach came in and said that, there's a little bit of instinct that is now removed from the game. And I'm joking about this college kid not shooting a pull-up, but you're only focused on the three-point line, and it takes away all the other things. It's
So
like
you
the
can
fun of-
still drive. We're just saying just step a little farther back.
For me, it'd be fine.
That is what every NBA coach is saying.
all right, Mike, I'm going to tee this up for you now. There's a lot of people out there saying this is a problem. Now, Evan's already started to question whether that's true. Maybe more recently, there are some people that are unhappy with it. Mike, what's your take? Do you think the
I just
audience wants this?
The media narrative around somehow that this is, that all the teams are just coming down and playing one style of play and jacking threes, I think is just not true. So that's the first problem, is that most of this discussion is not Daryl's game design discussion, some academic discussion about how we should redesign basketball.
Oh yeah,
from
academic
scratch.
discussion at MIT.
I'm just saying, no, it's good. I'm just, but most of the discourse on this problem is not that. Most of it is everybody just has to play this same style where we just come down and jack, and that's not what's actually happening in the NBA, right? We're getting the same number of shots at the rim. I haven't already said this. we've got all these different styles of play. We're taking the most threes in history, all right, that's fine. But OKC is turning opponents over like crazy. Denver's got Jokic doing all sorts of crazy passes. Detroit's beating the crap out of people. Houston's offensive rebound. Like, the game is not all the same. And so that part pisses me off. I think the game's more fun now. The ball moves more. If you watch our games, we have so many possessions where everybody touches the ball. We pass it around the outside. 60-something% of our threes are open. So it's not people just coming down and jacking. That's not what's happening.
And just real quick, we did something interesting recently in our group, which was look at not just the evolution of shot locations and play styles, but the diversity or variance across teams. What we actually found is the range of styles is actually the same width that it's always been. It's just that the whole game has shifted. The shot locations have shifted. The play styles have shifted, from isolation to more pick and roll. But actually, the variance across teams is the same as it's always been. So someone's saying today,
Can I ask
teams are
what the
playing.
range of styles is, just so I
The
understand?
gap
here?
between the team shooting the fewest threes and the most threes in like 2012 is something like 18%, and this year percentage points, and it's moved up, but it's still like 15 or 16.
So I'm talking like shot locations, mix of offensive sets and actions, play styles, so like play types, mix of isolation versus pick and roll. Like,
That data is very easy to manipulate.
So hang on. So but before we get
we
to
did.
But so hold on.
before we get to whether the data is manipulated, let me just put this out there. Just like we're saying, well, game design is not the lens through which we should look at it. Also, the variance in styles is not the question fundamentally that you raised was, what do the fans actually want?
Right, and-
is there any data on whether they're enjoying
Game
the game
design
more or
is what we
less?
should look at.
There is lots of data.
And what does the data say on
People
that?
watch well-designed games. They play well-designed games.
Mark Tatum was here yesterday saying we've got the most participation globally. We're the fastest growing sport. We just signed the biggest freaking media deal in NBA history. But there's more fan engagement than ever.
So all boats
We got-
going up,
we
there's
got
nothing to
Steph
improve?
Curry and
Like, it doesn't
Caitlin
make
Clark are
sense.
teaching
None
people
of these
that
arguments
anyone
make
can
sense.
play this game. You don't have to be 7 feet tall. If the threes have ruined the game, they've ruined it into all of those wonderful things. I don't get it.
But Mike, statistically speaking, just because all of those things are happening doesn't mean this isn't a problem. There's a lot of things happening, right? So the question is
but those
this
are good-
variable
I think those are
a
really
positive
good
or a
things.
negative?
So,
Is this-
the marketplace speaks to some extent. And I think what Mike's hitting on is the marketplace. And we clearly get incredibly good signals. I didn't mention attendance. We had our highest attended season last year. We're right on pace with that this year as well. The issue this year that was really interesting is viewerships in the early part of the season was down a little bit. And there were lots of reasons for that. But it created a window for people to pick their favorite issue, which this year was the volume of three-pointers, and attribute the viewership drop to the three-point revolution or the three-point increase without any evidence that that was the case. But then what we saw actually in all of our survey data and social media trends and that is after that narrative started to pick up, we actually saw dissatisfaction from our fans in the way the game's being played, but there hadn't actually been any change from the early part of the season to the latter part. And so the narrative is a problem because it actually shapes the minds of viewers and fans who would otherwise maybe like the game a little bit more. So that is something we have to address. Much like, as Sue said, the player piece is really important here too, because we've actually heard from some players that they don't like that they are told to do the same thing every possession. And if players are playing the game with less joy, less excitement, and they feel like they're less creative, even if the actual product at its core would be enjoyable to fans, fans can see that too. So there's things embedded within this that we actually need to talk about and potentially address that may not be directly related to game design, but actually the product.
So if I hear you correctly and if I hear Mike correctly, you think the bigger problem is the media narrative, which then does seep into the minds of the fans. If the media narrative hadn't been there, this wouldn't have been an issue. Is that the sort of general sense you have, or is that, am I not?
It might be overgeneralized, but I think that is a specific issue this season.
Got it. And so as somebody who's in the league office or as somebody who's thinking about the game as a player or as somebody who's running a team, how do you think about the view of the fan? Like, how much weight do you put on what the fans say they want? So if you sort of step back and say, there's this old quotation that allegedly Henry Ford said, but he never really said it, which is if I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have said they wanted a faster horse. And there's this belief in business that you have to be very, very careful about how much you listen to what people say they want versus what they might actually enjoy. Maybe on a scale of 1 to 10, if you were to ask fans, what do you want? And they said, I want this. How much weight would you put on it? Would 10 being like, people know exactly what they want and we should really pay attention to it, versus 1, trust me, until they see it, they have no idea what they want. Where do you guys put it? So what is it?
3.
A 3?
I'm on the low end.
Low end, so below 5.
Yeah. I'm on the low end because I don't think fans know how hard what NBA players are doing is. Their like scale of difficulty is all wonky. So they don't realize how difficult some of these plays are.
Yep.
So I'm on the low end for sure.
Mike, what do you think? How much should we weight what fans say they want?
I'm a little higher than that, but you know, like I'm getting paid by a team, and our customers matter to us.
No, I get that. I get
But
that.
do
But the
they
question
know?
is, do they know what they
Do
want?
they know?
I think they know. I think they know pretty.
So
I'll
what, you give
go
it like a
6.
7, 6? Okay.
Yeah, I'm at a 5 on the stated survey data, but that is just one piece of a much larger puzzle for us. We put a lot more weight into actual behavioral data. We can look at minute-by-minute viewership. We can look at league pass streams. We look at attendance. We've done studies. I think I've talked about this at the conference before. We've done studies in laboratories. We've got fans with heart rate monitors and skin temperature monitors as they watch games to track physiological responses to the actions we're seeing. So it's not just what they say. We're actually just starting a more political study this year that's looking at, from an ethnographic perspective, the way fans behave in their homes and make choices. So the survey data where they say, I want this or I don't want this, one piece of it, it's meaningful, but all that other stuff is the bigger part of the puzzle.
And I would add the participation in the game data should be important to us when we're thinking about game design. Because it's more than just the product we're selling on the court.
Yeah.
It's also about the game globally. We're sort of the stewards of that. So the game design point matters for that reason, far outside
It
the
just
commercial.
stops mattering when you get to the NBA.
No, it doesn't.
Okay, I'm just making sure.
I'm not saying don't think about it that way. I'm saying we have to take all this other stuff into account too.
Of course.
All right, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to have us zoom out and get away from the 3-point question itself, because the panel is here to discuss have nerds ruin basketball. And this piece is just one small piece of it. Anything on the court is just one piece of it. Data analytics obviously is being used for a lot of things. Organizations are using it for, revenue generation and optimizing revenue from stadiums or ticket sales or business operations, player health and safety. So is there anybody here who would say that data analytics in those spaces has been a negative in any way? And there's been some debate about whether the nerds have ruined gameplay, and there's a couple of different perspectives. When it comes to the use of data analytics, which is a lot of what people in this room care about, outside of what's happening on the court, is that pretty much a net positive? Like, it's great? Okay. So I want to bring up a third category.
We're at an analytics conference. Shocking, we say.
Yeah.
Great, yeah.
The third thing is, it's actually something I hadn't really thought much about until actually, Stu, I read some of the stuff that you had said earlier about another role that data plays, which is not in terms of how a team owner or somebody running an organization would think about data, or how a player or a coach would think about data, but the role of data from the fan perspective. And just the amount of data that's out there now allowing people to engage with the sport more. Can you say a little bit more about the role of data in that way, and sort of the NBA versus the WNBA in that domain?
So that was the origin of the Players Tribune article I did, oh my God, 9 years ago? Kill me. Which was me and my friends talking shop. Who did this? Who has this many that? I think it started off with like, who led the NBA in charges? And you could immediately look that up. Conversation. Oh, no way. Of course that guy. Yeah, he flops, this, that, right? Conversation. And we tried to look it up for the WNBA and we couldn't find it. And then you started to realize, like, man, there's so much conversation driven. Honestly, there's one that's happening right now in the WNBA that is tough for me as like the resident retired OG, because you have all these records being broken. And it's amazing on a lot of levels, because the talent, it's like, obviously it's going up and up. Women's basketball is in its moment for sure. But they play, so this year, they played 40 games this past season. This coming season, it'll go up to 44. When I first got in the WNBA, I played 32. I played 34 for a majority of my career, and my final season, I think I played 36. It's not actually about me. I only have one record. But it's about, like a player like Diana Taurasi and a player like Caitlin Clark are gonna get compared for the remainder of their lives.
So they should all get an asterisk now?
No, but my point is, when Aaron Judge broke Roger Ramirez's record, you knew the amount of games each of those players played. It was talked about constantly, and it's never mentioned in our league. And I think part of it is there's been this huge gaping hole in data, and so those conversations haven't been had for the last 10, 15 years. And so now that it is booming, people don't really know the history of it.
Is
and
it
I think
better?
it's so
Have you
important.
found it's better that the women's data is
It's getting
more
better,
available?
for sure, it's getting better. But it's the lack of, for so many years, I think has impacted the stories and the history of our game, for sure.
I think that's right. And that word that you mentioned, stories, and you mentioned that in that article a lot, I think is a really powerful way to think about it, which is this is the history of the game. it's captured in people's memories, but it's also captured in the data. And when the data isn't there, or the data is very, very simple, and the advanced statistics aren't there, I think people are not really understanding the game as much as they might have.
I was talking about this with Bill James last night, though. It's interesting, since we've installed the cameras in the arenas, the teams now have access to this huge treasure trove of data, of movements of players, and now for the last year and a half, the pose. And that data is not public like all of the data was when I started working for the team, right? So back in way before this conference started, when I started somehow working for an NBA team, the data I got inside the team was pretty much the same as the data outside. The play-by-play was a little harder to get publicly. You could scrape it, though, off of websites. And now we have this 29-point pose data at 60 frames a second, and that data is not public. And so, and there's good.
NBA.com/stats.
No, some of the output from that data is, but the actual tracking is, you can't go get the actual XY files from that, XYZ. And it means that a young analyst can't do the same things that we could do back then. Now, there's commercial reasons for that, right? So, and it's not as easy to manipulate that data, but it's sort of too bad that we've gotten really, really sophisticated in ways that the average fan can't engage with like we could back when we started.
That's right. If we sort of look at where we are, so we talked a little bit about the three-point sort of micro aspect of the game. Briefly touched on the fact that, of course, data analytics is doing a lot of other things as well, and now touched on the fact that from a fan perspective, there's even more to be thinking about. I want to kind of come back to the gameplay, though, and ask the following question, which is, in all these other domains, more data analytics seems to be just net positive and absolutely positive in terms of giving people what they need and what they want. We can always find some corner of it where it's like, oh, that was kind of too much data or whatever. When it comes to the actual playing of the game, this is where it's a zero-sum scenario, where each coach, each GM is just trying to use data to get an advantage on somebody else. And like with the 3 points, eventually maybe everybody will know what you're doing in some way. Are there ways in which you're using data to win the game that you think is actually elevating the game? Can you think of some examples that are making the game more interesting? The three-pointers, maybe you would say has, and he would say hasn't. Are there ones that we could agree on that, you know what?
He's not saying the three-pointer has not made the game more interesting. That is not, that can't be your contention.
I didn't hear what you said.
The three-point revolution, I was interpreting your answer as saying has made the game less interesting.
No, I didn't say that.
You did, okay, so what would you say?
I just said, well, first, can I just make a larger point, which is where the league offices and the teams have a responsibility. So the teams are optimizing winning. The game rules sort of set the gravity that pushes well-run teams towards optimizing the game. And that has no direction. People are like, oh, is it better or worse that analytics come? And you don't really know in game design at the beginning whether or not the incentives that are set forth by the league office or the rules of whatever game you're playing push you more towards a more interesting or a less interesting game. Yeah. It can go either way. It's just sort of is, basically. And we're all going to push ourselves to more threes, more offensive rebounds, because the intrinsic design of the game pushes you that way. Whether that's good or not, we don't know. For sure, the three-point line at the beginning was absolutely positive. And to Evan's point, you could even argue that it might still be positive, but there is going to be a point where we're very likely, if you look at the data, shooting 60, 73s, telling every great mid-range Hall of Fame level player that stop playing like you've played your whole life and move back 6
They won't have
feet.
played that way their whole life at that
But
point.
sorry, Daryl, just to get to the question I asked, which is,
Yeah, so
if at the end
I'm
of the day,
answering.
it
The
doesn't make the
three-point
game less
line,
interesting, what do you have a problem with it?
the three-point line was 100% good when it was put in, and as you know well, because you wrote a case on it, people didn't use it well at the beginning. You almost needed an over incentive, which is what they had to get people to try it because they were too dumb to know 3 is greater than 2. But over time, 100% that made the game better. I think we've hit the point where it's actually turning towards making the game worse.
Right, so I think what's embedded in that is, we don't disparage other sports, but there's clearly other sports that have had issues, fundamental issues about the way the game is played because of data and analytics that have been net negative, right? In totality, I think our view is that the trends we've seen driven by analytics are largely positive. As I said before, pace and space, fast-paced offense, three-point shooting, that leads to a style of play that fans really like. There have been more narrow examples where the optimal way to play or structure a team have actually been detrimental to the game, and we have acted quickly on those things.
What would be an example of that?
Transition take foul. Teams were fouling in transition to stop fast breaks. We had about 1,500 plays per season where we were deprived of seeing a fast break, which may have led to a dunk, a layup, a chase down block. We put in a transition take foul rule. Those are gone. Hack-a-Shack, a controversial issue. Should you be able to foul someone? Fans clearly hated it. We took it out.
Man-to-man defense rules prior to the
defense, non-basketball moves, flopping, goaltending, right? All of these five
And all
second
of
back
these
to basket.
is the lens, the primary lens. Are fans liking this or not?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And as guided by NBA stakeholders, like players, coaches, referees, like what are we seeing as a proxy for the fans? Because we do have a good sense of that. And even structural issues, like Daryl's predecessor in Philadelphia. What was happening here in Philadelphia 12 years ago was corrosive to the league. We changed the draft lottery. We instituted a play-in tournament. We see less of that year-over-year tanking than we did. Now, maybe there's a little more targeted stuff we need to get after this year because of what's going to happen again in Philadelphia. But
Why would you look at us?
Cut the mics. All right.
Let's look at some of the other teams around us.
Let's bring this back into the
but
conversation.
the overarching point is like when we see those things and when the data is clear, we act, right? We're not just here with our head in the sand. And so on this issue, I think what we're saying is like there may be space for changes, but we're not at the point where something drastic is needed, and we're not at the point where there's definitely a consensus from stakeholders that we need to do anything at all.
Okay, so Sue said something earlier about, one of the reasons you were going to give a low score to fans was because they don't quite get how hard it is. And I want to sort of take that into this realm as well. They don't get how hard it is. So when people say there's a three-point problem, or there's a this problem, or the game is too slow, or there's too much time on, looking at the referee's calls or whatever, when fans are throwing out ideas for what you should do to change the game, what percentage of those ideas that come at you would you say are actually like legitimately good ideas, and how much of them are completely off? Not because the problem isn't there, but because they don't understand the consequences of trying to make that change. Second order effects, third order effects. With the ideas coming to you from the outside, what do you think of those?
Well, first of all, it's so much easier to whine about something than it is to solve the something, right? So 90% of the time when someone comes to you and says,
Stop whining about that,
Mike. There's too many three-pointers, you say, well, what would you do? Like, what's the problem?
Yeah.
You want the mid-range shots, but you miss the 18-foot fadeaways? That's what you're missing?
Yeah.
And most of the time,
No, we're talking about wide open by the best shooters in the game are worse than challenge three. So don't straw man that it's a fadeaway 18-footer.
This is what you're saying, but it's not what the average person making this argument is saying, is what I'm saying.
So you can't worry about what the average person is arguing.
I think don't we have to?
They're bad at arguing.
The
We call the average person the paying fan.
Right, exactly.
The average
isn't there an
person
element to
is
this?
at the root of
To
this.
steel man the arguments, Mike. Don't just
Don't you
knock
think there's
down
an
straw
element
man.
to the fan part where you have to teach them,
Yeah.
like educate them on what?
What if they don't want to be educated? What if they
I think
just
they
want?
do. I think you'd be surprised. Maybe not like every single fan, but I think there's a group there that I don't think people watch a pick and roll and understand, why Joel Embiid is coming up. I'll go back to like JJ Redick days, like why that setup was what it was and what they're trying to manipulate. Granted, it happens very fast, so it can be hard to break it down, but I don't think the average fan knows that. And I think if they understood it, they'd be like, oh, genius.
They also
And they'd
don't
be
know
more
it's even
appreciative.
hard to know if a pick and roll happens sometimes.
Yeah, exactly.
Someone's
That's
just
Oh, they ghost that.
ghosting it or whatever. Yeah, it's hard.
But like the most frequent thing people bring up in this is, should we have a 4-point shot, right?
Oh, stop with the straw mans. What a waste
Daryl,
of time.
let the man
It's a waste
speak.
of time of our panel.
You don't actually
You could bring up 30 dumb ideas and we could argue. Let's talk about good ideas.
I have
has a whole
30 dumb
list of
ideas,
those that
actually.
he's gonna
Okay, let's
ask us
talk about the good ideas. A 4-point shot doesn't
We all agree that's not a good
The
idea.
organizers, so we'll just do this. We'll just do this for fun then, real quick. With the average, not necessarily the average person.
Grouchy.
I think a survey went out to, I think, people that are signed up for this conference. Maybe some of you filled it out. We just said, hey, what would you do to improve the game of basketball? And they're organized into different categories here. A bunch of them are on the three-pointers, but more of them are on the pace of the game and increasing the excitement of the game and integrity of the game. I'll just throw out a few and just raise your hand if you think there's merit in it. All right? This is what the average...
4-point shot. Our hands roll down.
Change the value of threes and twos. Change the values of threes and twos. So this is on the three-point thing. Change the ratio of the three-pointer and the two-pointer.
To what?
It doesn't matter, just in
Mid-range
some
is
way.
2.5. Mid-range
Darryl would
2.5.
say it matters.
What
Are we
does it mean
talking
to have
some, like,
merit?
Count half.
esoteric notion of merit, or should we do this?
What do you mean?
As
are
in, like,
different.
is it a reasonable idea? You'd be like, oh, let me think about that.
you would think about
like
it.
a reasonable idea. Like, okay.
Are
Yeah,
you
would it-
saying merit, and are you saying in the short run or in the long run?
No, like-
I don't
like you-
understand that.
This is a very
the
simple
nerds have
question.
ruined the panel.
Somebody says this. Somebody says this idea to you over lunch or a coffee. Do you like internally like
Okay,
roll
has-
your eyes,
has
or
rough
you kind of
merit.
be like, oh, this could be interesting?
Well-defined rough merit.
Yeah. This question is not to you. This is Evan.
Is it the first time I've heard it or the 50th? It would work.
Okay.
The proposal that makes sense would be 2s, 3s, 4s, right? Close to the basket, mid-range, long distance. We're just not going to do that. But like conceptually, it would work.
Okay. Limit the number of intentional fouls in the last minute. If people exceed it, the other team gets the foul shot and the possession. Something of that kind. Crazy because
Is
what?
that big of an issue?
What?
Is that big of an issue?
I don't.
That doesn't happen enough.
Shorten the season to about 50 games and less teams in the playoffs. Eliminate the play-in tournament.
Come on.
Oh, more play-in, more play-in.
Okay, wait.
I like.
Why-
I would say I like 40
I'm
minute
not
games.
me. I'm just reading what people
LeBron
say.
said the person who came up with that should be fired.
All right. He loves it. Yeah, okay. Okay.
You want to criticize the cup?
I do like a
accept it, but the
40-minute
play-in?
game.
Reduce.
Yeah, 40-minute game.
I like a
yeah.
40-minute game.
40-minute game?
Just
Okay.
sucking up to
All
Allen
right.
is a good job.
Widen
I
the
think the load
basketball
management
court
part.
6 inches on each side.
6 inches.
Listen, I read the
No,
rest of this answer. The rest of the answer
Some amount of
was-
widening. Just,
Okay.
just make these better questions.
Fine. These are not questions. These are what the average fan
Which
is
row are we
telling
getting
you.
rid of in the
Yes,
stands?
Yeah.
Exactly.
yeah.
Be
It's actually
Steve
more-
Jobs and ask the right
3
question.
second rule behind the 3-point line.
I don't know.
You can't
Everybody
just
has
be
to be
standing
inside.
around.
Why would I give a referee like anything else to monitor?
Hawkeye's got it.
Good
Okay.
answer.
Like-
So
they can't count to 5.
These
Why 3?
things
Yeah.
that you get.
Who's
You're not a
tracking
big
that?
fan
Well,
of
you didn't read the ones I
crowdsourcing.
like.
Okay, tell me which one you like. You told me something.
No, he says he loves crowdsourcing. These are great questions for Evan. Yeah.
All right.
Loves
ideas,
whatever the fans
Three
think.
seconds. Behind
How
the
about
3-point line.
centralized refereeing in New Jersey instead of having officials go to the
Oh, that's a
monitor?
fun one. People don't know that we already do that.
And then use that for
Yeah, that could
the
Stop
call.
with
The
the
referees in
already-
the replay center
You
make
still have the ref down there. You do some of it.
the fouls are determined
Yes,
by the ref. on
threes
court.
versus
Everything
two.
else is
Oh,
done.
maybe this one you liked. Free throws are accumulated over the course of
No.
each half and taken at the end of the first half.
No.
I'm just telling you. This is
Just
what's
one
coming.
free throw we should do. We do that in G
So
League.
why are we?
Yeah, I'm in on that.
Yeah, on
Okay.
that. Okay, can we talk about the ones we might actually do and should
What?
do now?
What would you actually do?
Okay, the point of a foul is to get the person to stop doing an illegal thing to the player, and making a 3-point shot, a 2-shot foul already does that. It's still bad. You wouldn't foul them, and a 3-point penalty is too big. And in the last 2 minutes, like we do all over the place in our rules, you'd make it a 3-shot foul just to not skew the strategic dynamics. So that change should happen today, maybe next year, because I don't like changing things in the middle, even though you guys do that. So.
Evan, is that the kind of thing you could? get behind?
Daryl didn't like that we changed the value of a player that he traded for after he traded for him.
No,
because
no,
the
I
rules-
don't like that you changed what a foul was in the middle of last season. So
But setting that
fans
aside,
liked
on
it.
this particular idea, would that be the kind of thing you guys would agree on?
No,
if the
I
fans like it, you should change rules in the middle of the season. So then we should change this rule now.
I don't know. Can you restate what the rule is?
It's a foul of a 3-point shot.
Yeah.
It's just a normal 2-shot foul.
So
Until
more,
the last.
more fouls.
So yeah, that's gonna.
Oh, stop with the more
The
fouling.
incentive for fouls will go up.
So
because
fine,
you
you're
don't want the
arguing against
person
all
making
fouls
free.
then. We
But
should
no,
make
but-
all fouls worth less, so we have less fouls.
I think
it's ridiculous.
this is the beauty
Tackle
of
the person
this is what happens.
But
So
Everything's
we don't
not
need to
black
actually
and
get
white.
to a
It's like we're doing some
conclusion because I
balancing
think
here, right?
Yeah, it's-
I
You're
think the
gonna
conclusion
create
is
more
clear. This
fouls
would
with
not
that
be
rule.
an easy
So
thing
any-
for
intentional
you to
fouls.
do.
Any rule that
correct?
creates more
If it
fouls
would
is
create more
bad.
fouls, then no, because our fans don't like fouls.
So this is the thing that I think maybe the average fan doesn't appreciate, which is that if Daryl and Evan cannot agree on anything and how easy it is, directionally which way it's going to go, et cetera, and they think about this all the time, it might be the case that when somebody writes down a piece of advice, here's what the NBA should be doing, they haven't thought about second, third, fourth order effects.
we agreed
That's
on one
probably
free
true.
throw for 2 points or 3 points.
Well, which one is it?
The G League rule, 1 free throw in all free throw instances. in
So
the
that's
first
going to
4
happen
to 6.
maybe?
It's coming.
It's coming?
coming.
All right, you heard it here.
Oh.
Maybe not even first, who knows? All right. We're going to do a couple of quick questions, and we're going to go to some audience questions as well. We have a couple of coming in. All right, and please feel free to send in some questions. First, this is kind of like a speed round. You don't have to answer it, but I'd like to get at least 3 or 4 answers. The first one everybody should answer. If we stipulate that the three-point revolution did ruin basketball, if we did do that, what percentage of the blame would be on Daryl?
Skip the question.
No. Well, how much is Daryl responsible for that transition, whether it's bad or good? What do you think?
They're rejecting the premise.
5%, 10%?
Would have happened with or without him.
Okay,
Correct.
irrelevant.
But
But what?
it didn't happen with anyone else.
Would have happened with or without
Would
him.
have eventually happened, but
Michael Lewis is here somewhere. He deserves at least as much credit, or if not more. Than
Billy
that.
Bean.
Billy
Bill
Bean.
James.
Like, yeah. Bill James.
the question is
that
just,
was, that was coming.
75.
Pythagoras, sure.
thank you. Sue, listening to
Next
the actual
question.
question.
Yeah, exactly.
Next question.
You're at 20%, maybe 10,
Last.
6. All right. All right.
Did Columbus discover America?
Okay. You are, okay, imagine for your organization, you are hiring someone for your data analytics team. And your candidate is going to have a certain mix of the following 3 traits. Analytical ability, like just brain power, interpersonal skills, emotional intelligence, sort of EQ, and passion. And you have 100 points you can allocate across these 3 buckets to create your ideal candidate. Where do you put those 100
They
points?
better have some basketball knowledge, too.
No,
only have-
among these,
only
they can
have
also have,
three like
forget
that.
everything else. They might also want to show up to work on time. We're not talking about those things. We're talking about
I
these
think
3
the
categories.
basketball knowledge one's a little.
How do you allocate the 100 to brain power, EQ, passion?
Sue, you're going to run a
What's-
team someday. So
What's
you
what's the job title for this?
They're for your sports analytics, your data analytics team. Your data analytics team.
I don't know. What's probably the analytical part,
Would be-
40,
Okay.
and then maybe split the other 2.
40, 30, 30?
a well-balanced
40,
person.
40, 40, 20.
I like
40, what's 20?
well-balanced.
Passion.
Passion is 20, 40, 40 for the other 2?
50, 0, 50.
What's 0?
The second one.
Interpersonal.
EQ?
Yeah, they
That
don't.
makes sense.
Yeah, they're not talking to people.
They don't need
They're in
to.
a room.
We can just have them talk to the people. that
Doesn't
talk to
care
them.
what other people think or
Analytics
feel.
and passion, but the EQ is
How are
not
they
the relevant
communicating
piece.
it?
No, they'll just give it to the other person.
That's the
and then
least surprising
communicate.
answer.
So there's an
Wait, honestly, I'm
Those
a little
two
bit
people still have to
surprised based on some other
communicate,
things I've heard you
We
say in the
just
past.
plug
but
'em
okay.
in.
All right, last, maybe not last, we'll a couple more. If you think about impact on the game, will the impact that AI is going to have on sports in the next 2 decades going to be more or less dramatic than the impact that sports analytics has had on sports in the last 2 decades?
Less going forward. On the game?
On the
On
sport,
the actual game, less. Because we're already doing all the AI stuff in the game because it's just forecasting. And it'll have
So
less.
20 years from now, we'll look back and the changes will not have been as drastic as what we've already gone through.
Yes. The drastic changes have happened, barring some well-constructed rule change. By
But it doesn't have to
waiting
just
for
be. It just doesn't have to be what's happening on the court by players. It could be that refs are now AI.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think still less. I mean, the
Okay.
changes the last 20 years have been massive. Yeah.
In gameplay alone, I agree. I think broader sports industry societally more, but specific to the way NBA basketball is played less.
Got it.
Yeah, off the court, fan
Yeah,
experience.
more.
Yeah.
Like 7. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. These are yes or no questions. This panel is not familiar with this concept, I understand. But we're going to try them anyway. They really are just yes or no. They genuinely. Okay, 10 years from now, do you think the following will be true? All right, do you think this will be true? The 3-point line will be exactly where it is right now.
10 years from now?
10 years
no.
from now.
Yes.
Oh, come on. Evan,
Only because if he says no, then he's going to have to put
Evan
pressure
does
into
not
it.
believe that.
matter.
Okay, Mike, what do you think? 10 years from now,
Yeah.
it will be the same? Same, not same?
No.
10 years from now, there will be a 4-point shot in the NBA.
No.
No.
10 years from now, the average number of 3 points attempted will be at least 20% higher than it is today in both the NBA and the WNBA. As in, we are still on an upward
Percentage
trajectory.
points or relative percentage?
Points attempted, 3-pointers attempted.
No, but we're at 42% now. Are you saying like 20% higher or like 20 percentage
Yeah.
points higher?
No,
That's very different.
no, it's 20% higher.
48 from 40
So
to
50 to 50 to 60 would be 20% higher. That's what you
Yes,
prove
and
here.
I'll point out that I don't know the answer in WNBA because
I think it's yes.
Okay, it's yes.
Yeah, it's yes.
No.
You don't think it'll be higher by?
I know for the NBA, yes for the WNBA.
Because
Okay.
if it were getting higher and we had a problem with that, we would make changes. So you didn't say absent any changes.
Daryl, jump in.
I said if we had a problem.
Okay.
So you heard it here first. We now know exactly where they're going to change it.
I just
All
think
right.
the game,
Find it.
the game is cyclical.
Okay.
And so in the NBA, it'll cycle and then it'll cycle through. In the WNBA, we're a little behind in the 3-point cycle.
Teams do adapt. If we knew everyone
no
was trying to take a three, then you'd do more stuff to get more layups. Like things get allocated dynamically. It's not.
Maybe there's more.
All right. I'm going to ask one last yes/no, and then we're going to go to a couple other questions from the audience. 10 years from now, the Sixers will have won a championship.
Yes.
Sue, do you want to wait? No,
Go Sonics.
Abstain.
Abstain. All right. All right. Questions from the audience. Okay. If we assume that basketball strategy trends are cyclical, I guess we can assume that.
Sue just put that.
And look ahead, yes, and look ahead 5 to 10 years, what do you think the dominant on-court trend or strategy might be? Now, you can interpret this probably in a few different ways. Interpret it in any way that allows you to answer it.
It'll just be more players see how the NBA is played. They then practice that way from a young age all the way up. It'll just be more and more players who can switch multiple ball screens, who can also shoot threes, and who can crash the offensive boards. That will be what happens, and it'll just keep getting more and more optimal until Evan steps in and sets the rules slightly different.
I think what we've seen in the last year or so since some rule changes is much more physicality. And so I'll be curious to see if the rules stay the same because that's been a big change.
And do you think it's going to get more and more and more physical the way
I
it was
think
maybe
if the
back in the
rules
day?
are left the way they are now, the physicality will increase even more.
And just out of curiosity, when in history do you think the physicality was like the right level? Like, are we like pining for
I loved the way it was a year or two ago, but I think I don't know. I'm not
too physical then?
I don't think it's gotten too physical, but I mean,
Close?
it's getting there. Yeah,
So you weren't a fan of like the way things were like back in the day?
like the '90s
Yeah.
basketball. No, I wasn't a fan of that.
Yeah.
Did you
didn't
watch
like-
those Celtics teams? Like,
I grew up in Detroit, so we had a different
you like
approach
physical plays too?
to the sport.
I think there's a balance. I don't like, I'll be honest, if I check the NBA scores and it's 140 to 130, I'm just like assuming that it was not a physical game and it was a free-flowing offense, which is I feel like a couple years ago. I feel like you have to give the defensive chance for the offense to be even more impressive. And that's like the balance for me from a physicality. No, personally, no, I hate it.
Yeah, I find the more
But I get it's
skilled,
a part
the
of
more
it.
skilled the player, the less they like physicality because it doesn't allow them to show
do
their
it.
skill. Because
Yes.
the people who are bad at basketball, like myself, would just play super physical.
Yes.
if
to-
you've ever
to
played
adjust-
pickup with Daryl, that's what he does.
just-
But-
because-
In the WNBA,
because it's optimal to the rules because there aren't fouls in pickup. So
in the WNBA, physicality is rewarded too much, I believe, currently.
To Sue's cyclicality point, I do think there's potentially this this shift of those skills, those same skilled players, the athleticism, being applied more to defense. Like you've got some of the youngest players in our league who are coming in as incredible defenders right now, and I think that's something we didn't see for a period of time. So as that cycles back, you might actually see a little bit more balance.
I'm kind of hopeful that the media narrative shifts a little bit to defense because the defenses right now are so
Unbelievable.
good.
Yeah.
It's changed really drastically in the last 10 years too. We talk a lot about the threes, but the intricacy and skill on defense is so much better than it's ever been.
And do you think the problem there is that people just don't think about defense generally enough, so the media doesn't talk about it enough? It's just not what's as
Not
exciting
sexy.
to folks?
Watch the game and it's about scoring. That's
Yeah.
what people think about first.
But it would be
I actually
great if
think this year has been an interesting case study about like some of the perimeter players that are in conversation for DPOY and some of the the Thompson twins, like the Terra twins in Houston. Like a lot of that narrative that probably wouldn't have been there in other years is really front and center.
Yeah. If you think about what this session is about, are the nerds breaking basketball or sports? If you think about it, in a sense, we've done something very important here. I think we've gone through every way in which the sport is being impacted by data, and basically come out and said, it's moving in the right direction, and where it's not, maybe there'll be some self-correction that happens. It's a little bit like trying to save the moral soul of the conference or something, because sports has been around before the data analytics revolution, and teams have been doing what they're doing, coaches are doing what they're doing, and then like the the analytics folks come in, and it's a little bit like the Doge of sports. And like, we're going to come in, we're going to fix everything. And it raises a question a little bit, which is like, is it going to be like, we're going to create a bunch of value and be efficient and all these sort of things, like the way Doge is supposed to be? Or is it going to be a bunch of, I don't know, self-aggrandizing, value-destroying, power-hungry parasites that are going to do something else? And it looks like, as we go through all the different categories, there's a pretty solid case to be made that it's been pretty positive. I'm going to ask the last question to Sue, and other people can weigh in on it as well. As someone who played at the highest level, do you ever feel analytics overtook the human or emotional side of the game? Now, I know you said it at the individual level a little bit when somebody comes to you and says this or they'll ask this. Are we missing something, maybe from the fan point of view, from the player point of view, from the business point of view, even when you think about fans? Is there anything about the data sort of revolution that has made it more numeric and less about affect in any negative way? Or do we sort of see it as synergistic?
I have to be honest, the analytic wave wasn't in the WNBA the way it is in the NBA when I played. So I don't really have this like firsthand experience to tell you, but what I can say is when I go play a pickup game and I'm able to just play and I'm not thinking about, the value of what shot I'm taking and the contest and this and that, it is much more enjoyable. I think to Evan's point, it brings out something different in players, and I would argue that there are probably NBA guys who, when they play pickup, play totally different from how they would play on their teams. What's there for you to like pull from? I don't know. That's up to you guys to figure out. But I do think that is a real thing.
I feel like we should always end with Sue.
I think that's great, and then we're done. Thank you. Thanks, folks.